Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All right. It's all right. I'm actually going to stay up here. I feel sort of more comfortable standing than I do talking, but try to remember to keep talking to the mic here. So first, I do want to thank everyone for coming. Thanks very much. It's been a lot of work from a lot of people. Thanks very much to the Criminal Justice League for spending a lot of time setting this up. So I want to sort of thank everyone involved. It's been a lot of different people taking different parts. So thanks very much for sort of setting this up. So it's true, a great deal of my research is about school violence and school shootings. I've looked at various things, looking at the causes of them, looking at warning signs and profiles, looking at attacks that have been prevented, sort of averted incidents of school shootings, and also at school policies and practices which help prevent school shootings. So I'm going to mention sort of just briefly why I got interested in this in the first place, sort of why I would be interested in not a particularly uplifting, pleasant phenomenon, why I've sort of spent a lot of time studying this. And that's sort of because of my own sort of experiences when I was a student in high school. So the Columbine sort of massacre, the Columbine incident happened in 1999. That's when I was a junior in high school. And shortly after that, there was sort of a really widespread reaction. First of all, there were lots of sort of copycat incidents sort of in the wake of that, but also there was lots of fear, and part of that was there was increased sort of use of zero tolerance policies as well, so extra sort of focused and sort of extremely sort of punitive policies, mandatory arrests and sort of suspensions and expulsions and things like this for minor student behavior, things that sort of wouldn't have previously been treated so seriously. And so when this was happening, there was actually an incident at my school. Someone wrote in the boys' bathroom, wrote Columbine could happen here and had listed a date. So when that date happens, everyone's quite scared. A lot of people don't go to school that day. They still have school. I go. So I go through the day. There's very few people in every class, but at the end of the day, I am leaving my last class, walking to my lockers with my friend Matt. We're walking to our lockers, and my friend Matt says, sort of to me, says, "Boy, today sure was disappointing." That's his statement. It was a frustrating day, that's what he says, but as he says it, we're turning a corner, and as he says that, the vice principal, sort of one of the administrators, turns around, turns the same corner, and overhears him say that. This is interpreted as a threat, sort of that he's making a threat against the school, and he is sort of summarily sort of suspended, and ultimately sort of encouraged not to come back to school at all. So it was a suspension, but sort of in practice kind of an expulsion. So that was his last day of school. And so after this experience, seeing this sort of event, did got me very interested in looking at these incidents, sort of what causes them, but also sort of some better ways to react to these things that are sort of more measured, sort of more reasonable responses than sort of just punishing people for sort of interpreting a wide range of things as threats. So first thing, sort of, we talk about these things. School shootings are really rare events. The first thing I should say, schools are, in general, the safest places, sort of, for young people to spend time in. The risk for sort of homicide for students is roughly, you're talking about 226 times greater outside of school than sort of in school, and you're talking about 1 in 2 million chance of any particular student dying from a homicide or a suicide at school any given time. So they are rare events. However, when they do happen, they are horrific events. The casualties, they devastate sort of the community as a whole. They create sort of widespread fear among the population. They leave sort of survivors and bystanders with post-traumatic stress often. So they are horrendous incidents. So one of the things that I do want to talk about a little bit is sort of my role here, perhaps to some extent, is talking about the causes of these events, what happens to cause these things. And there's lots of different research from different people from different disciplines talking about this stuff. A lot of times people focus on depression or mental illness, personality disorders. And there are cases where that's true. There are cases, if you talk about the killers at Virginia Tech and killers also sort of at Newtown who have sort of histories of mental illness, but that's actually in the minority. The vast majority of cases, actually, people have no documented history of any kind of mental illness. So sort of some that can be vexing in that kind of a way. The other thing people sometimes look at is negative relationships with peers, victimization through bullying. That's sort of a common thing people consider. There's some debates as to whether that happened at Columbine or other incidents, but it's definitely true that in the vast majority of incidents, the vast majority, kids have experienced sort of prolonged experiences with bullying. That is true. Other people talk about sort of the exclusionary nature of sort of teenage cliques in high schools. intolerant, homogeneous sort of communities that don't tolerate difference. It is true, sort of those are often more likely to happen in those sort of areas, or particularly in rural communities and suburban communities that have sort of particularly homogeneous areas. Other times people talk about sort of, it has to do with dominant notions about masculinity, that people sort of trying to reinforce sort of their masculinity, assert their sort of toughness, that kind of a way, by engaging in sort of violence. People talk about sort of also gun culture and things like that. So there's lots of different approaches, lots of different things people talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of some of the work that I've done in trying to sort of deal with all of these things sort of together. If we talk about causes, I think it's better to talk about this in sort of a cumulative kind of a way, about how all of these things sort of matter together in sort of in a sequential way. They build upon one another. It's not any one particular thing by itself. So what you often see in a lot of these cases, this sort of first term here, we have sort of chronic strain, which is true that in a lot of cases of school shooters' sort of life histories, they do have sort of long-term frustrations, disappointments, failures. Often sort of, this includes sort of regularly being bullied. But that's true for lots of people, right? Lots of people experience bullying or have negative life experiences. That's true for the majority of people. Lots of people live through negative things. However, for a lot of people, sort of the strains of everyday life, negative things that happen to you, typically happen sort of in the context of, in the presence of sort of having pro-social relationships, people to support you, people to encourage you, or to sort of teach you what is right, or sort of to support you when you're having hard times. And so sort of the next stage we talk about sort of uncontrolled strain. This is often sort of what happens when people are experiencing negative experiences, but in a context where they are isolated. They don't have other people to support them. And so you have sort of the image sometimes of school shooters being loners, and that is true a lot of the time. That is true in many cases where people didn't have sort of, know lots of people, didn't have a lot of friends or sort of attachments. But there's also cases, right, where have been killer duos. There have been people who have like sort of one good friend that they rely on, that they sort of reinforce this kind of negative beliefs, sort of the idea that it's okay to engage in this sort of violent activity. And so you have people who sort of encourage this violent behavior among each other. That's true with sort of killer duos at Columbine, and at also the shooting at Jonesboro, Arkansas, and some other cases. So sort of the second level there. And the next thing is sort of this idea of acute strain. And this is something sort of Christina alluded to, right? That people have this notion that these things sort of, people just snap and they sort of kill someone. Well, this is sort of a longer process than that. So what usually typically is the case is there is some sort of last cumulative sort of straw, some last straw, sort of an acute strain, a catastrophic loss that happens, or something that's sometimes just perceived to be catastrophic. Being dumped, being fired, being expelled. So we talk about, this has come out fairly recently in terms of the killer at Newtown, was actually being forced to move out of the house that he'd lived in a long time, which he actually never left his room for like a long period of time, sort of was really isolated, and sort of but his mom had this plan to move actually, potentially to Washington State actually was part of the plan, and sort of this was this last straw, this thing that was devastating to him, and that's often sort of what happens in a lot of cases. And the last thing, the next stage we talk about is sort of the planning stage. And it is true that in a lot of these cases, it isn't just sort of someone snapping and making this decision. They plan for these things a great deal of time in advance, in many cases. Sometimes, for days, for weeks. Columbine, for example, again, we have evidence that they planned that for more than a year. And so often when they plan this thing, it's a sort of, they take, great joy in sort of fantasizing about these things. Often they talk about it sort of, they plan this in the sense of, regaining lost sense of sort of power or feeling strong and sort of, often masculine, because the vast majority of these really are committed by men and boys. And also, of course, to gain fame and infamy is part of this too. That's part of their goal as well. And they often brag about it to many people. Sort of, Christina also mentioned sort of the idea of leakage, which I'll talk a little bit more about. That's sort of originally a Secret Service term, actually. And it comes from sort of this idea that lots of people, when they commit these shootings, the vast majority tell lots of people about their plans. Lots of people, and so we'll talk more about that, why that becomes important for prevention in a minute. And the last thing I want to talk about is sort of the massacre itself, sort of the last stage, where you need to have lots of people sort of collectively, congregated closely together in classrooms or other public places, And also you need to have, sort of people need to have access to and training in sort of firearms in particular, typically firearms. And that's crucial, and that's true because if you look at, compared to other cases, there are, for example, if you look, there's been lots of recent massacres and sort of school attacks, rampage attacks in China, where they have much more sort of strict gun control, so they still happen. But when they happen, and there's been older adults who come in and have tried to attack and killed and sort of tried to kill a bunch of students, elementary school students and other students, but it's typically with axes or with knives. And what you get there is still lots of injuries, but you don't get the same kind of death tolls that you get in the United States and other places because of the fact that you have sort of weapons which enable such sort of mass destruction. So, next thing I want to talk about a little bit is some of my more current research, which is about incidents of averted school shootings, which have not really been studied very much. Sort of where there's an incident where someone planned to shoot up the school, sort of, but it was stopped before it was actually carried out. And sort of the cases where people had hit lists, suicide notes involving sort of telling about what their plan was to kill people that have been found. Some cases that I looked into where students had sort of amassed gigantic arsenals of weaponry, pipe bombs, guns, homemade napalm, all sorts of things they kept in their bedrooms, in their parents' houses often, with sort of notebooks detailing who they wanted to kill, where, when, in what order, all sorts of very specific details. And so this is sort of, I just finished writing a book about this, and what I was interested in looking at is these averted incidents. Why are these things averted? Why, and which really hasn't been studied very much. When these things are prevented beforehand, why are they prevented? And so I was fortunately sort of granted access to go to 11 public schools. They are all around, actually in the Northeast. I did in-depth interviews with sort of lots of people who were involved in averting these particular incidents, directly involved in averting them. So I talked to lots of administrators, superintendents, and principals, also sort of various counselors, security personnel, police officers, resource officers, some of the arresting officers, and teachers who are all directly involved. And I'll make this sort of real brief, but some of the things we can talk about what did work and what did not. And that's important because a lot of the things that you hear about are solutions that really don't make that much of a difference, that aren't so helpful. So the first is sort of security cameras, right? The problem with security cameras, well, first of all, they have had security cameras at most of these places. Columbine had security cameras. And also often sort of security cameras are something that schools go look at after the fact. They're not something that you have actively someone watching at any given time, is rarely the case. And also, of course, it's not going to be a deterrent. It's not going to stop someone from going in and committing a school shooting because, frankly, they want the fame. They want to be filmed. That's sort of part of their plan. They're perfectly happy to be filmed. So that's not, it's often talked about as a sort of solution to school shootings, but it doesn't, not necessarily so helpful. The same when we're talking about sort of zero tolerance policies sort of where you, have automatic suspensions for, various things, various behavioral things that you do, or bringing guns to school, all sorts of things like that. Of course, that does really nothing to sort of, prevent sort of the conflict that originally was going on or why they were upset in the first place. And if you're going to then automatically sort of suspend or expel someone, that often can work as a sort of final acute strain. It's a final catastrophic straw, that sort of last straw that can result in people sort of wanting to do this. So not so helpful. And finally, we talk about sort of school resource officers, which is a little bit more complicated here when we talk about school resource officers. So often the idea is that people say you should have school resource officers, you want to have armed security, armed personnel at the school, and that will deter these events. That will make someone not come to those schools in the first place. So you can't say that, because certainly there have been sort of resource officers actually at Columbine did have a resource officer. There have been sort of university police at all of these sort of lots of campus shootings. So you can't say that it's a deterrent. That's not to say that it doesn't play a role. Certainly they are often the first responders. They do definitely, when they're on the scene, they can call reinforcements, they call backup in, and that makes a big difference. Also, as we'll talk about, they do play another sort of important role in terms of threat assessment. They also play an important role in terms of sort of being sort of the law enforcement at the school for students to come forward to if they hear threats, if they hear about one of their friends or someone talking about shooting up the school. They often do go to law enforcement, go to the resource officer in particular. So they play a role in that way, for sure. Okay. And of course, there are ways around locked doors, ways around metal detectors. These are things that a lot of schools have brought about in recent years, but metal detectors, there's been lots of cases where someone just shoots the person running the metal detector as they go in. So if your plan is to kill a bunch of people and then kill yourself at the end, you're not so concerned with sort of stopping that person as well. And in contrast, I want to talk about some of the stuff that actually has worked, that we've seen make a big difference. So the first one is sort of positive bystander behavior on the part of students. So students coming forward when they have been exposed to this leakage, when they've had other students tell them, don't come to school on Tuesday, something's going to happen, don't come to school, or, I actively want to kill sort of people at school. There have been lots of sort of active threats that many students hear. But when those students actually come forward and come to resource officers or counselors or administrators or teachers and sort of tell them about the threat, that's really what's made, really sort of universally, that's really what's made the difference in a lot of different ways. The last one is sort of the idea of, instead of taking sort of an approach about warning signs or various profiles, and there's been lots of profiles, there is no profile of a school shooter. They have come from all sorts of walks of life. They have lots of different characteristics and things like this. And there's been lots of warning sign lists that have been branded about, they like violent video games or goth music, or they lack an interest in school. These are some of the warning signs that have been branded about in recent years. That applies to a wide swath of the population. It's not really the most helpful way to target people. In contrast, one of the sort of new approaches that has emerged, and actually really comes out of attempts to prevent sort of assassinations of public officials, and also this is work from sort of lots of law enforcement and also the Secret Service as well, sort of is the threat assessment approach, which you're looking at sort of how detailed, how direct the threat is, how developed sort of and actionable the threat is, how has someone actually gone to great lengths to plan this? Have they sort of already gotten the firearms? Have they already sort of written out a list of who they want to kill, and sort of all these sort of elaborate plans that they've done, sort of to take those more seriously and to sort of investigate those thoroughly. And sort of these are the things that sort of have really made a big difference. So in closing, I'll just say sort of that definitely it's important. We talk about sort of prevention, sort of this kind of approach. I think things like focusing on bystander intervention and encouraging students to come forward is really important, whether that's through sort of anonymous tip lines. I think things like Live Safe, I think is really important in that regard as well. Yeah, that will do it for me.